Welcome this afternoon to the Curmudgeon's Guide to Building Drupal Websites. I will be your curmudgeon today, Greatens. I am the Director of Drupal Engineering at Bounteous. I have been with Bounteous since about 2009 and working with Drupal that long as well. I've been a professional developer since 1994, but I've been a curmudgeon for far longer than that. And I like to go to Brewers Fantasy Camp. So if you need something for your bike spokes, I'll get you a card later. Who is Bounteous? We create big picture digital solutions. We were founded in 2003, and it's really awesome because I work with lots of talented individuals, and we do everything from strategy to experience design, analytics and insight. There's a bunch of us that have spoken this weekend, or I guess this week. We are also looking for a Drupal architect, so if you'd like to work with me, please track me down. So this is my overview. Hopefully it fits in 30 minutes. We'll do some talking about how I think we can be effective at Drupaling and running projects efficiently, and I have a slide or two on growing as a developer if I get that far. So my goal whenever I start a project really is to, by the end of it, to have the client be happy. And a lot of the sales folks will say, on time, on budget. That's all great, but projects have a way of not sticking to the original designs when you're first talking about these things. So I'm really focused on having the client be happy. And then to do this, we need to be efficient, we need to be effective, but we also need clear communication. So let's talk a little bit about effective Drupaling. If you failed to plan, you're planning to fail. I think Ben Franklin said that. And I think it's very true when we're building Drupal websites. We need a solid foundation for the build, so we need a really good plan to get us there. So as I'm thinking about preparing for the build, I think there are a few key things for us. One is to be involved as early as we can. So back when I first started doing the Drupaling thing, the design agency would design stuff and then they would lob it over to you. And they usually didn't know a whole lot about Drupal or CMSs in general. So we want to get involved as soon as we can because we want to help guide the design, right? We really want to take advantage of Drupal and all that it can do for us. That doesn't necessarily mean we tell them what to do, right? We don't want to scare the design. They're really talented folks and they know what they're doing. But we want to make sure when they're making a decision that's going to impact the build, make it take a lot longer, cost more money, that they're making it with them, they're being mindful about it. When we're preparing and we're involved early on, we also want to determine what can go wrong. And we want to identify those risks because we want to be prepared for them. We don't want to think that they're going to happen, but if something does happen to go wrong, we want to be prepared to adjust to whatever happens to have gone wrong. And I think a lot about this when it comes to like scope, budget, and timeline, right? If something does go wrong, what are we going to do about it? What can we change? And we work with a variety of customers and clients, and some are like, the budget is the most important thing. Here is $100,000, and we can't go over it, right? And that's fine. That's something that we should be mindful of as we're doing the build. But what that tells me is that scope and/or timeline have to be able to give, right? If we run into issues or something that doesn't work as we expected it to, and we're really constrained by the budget, then we need to adjust the scope accordingly. Likewise, timeline can be the driver. So I think of one of our clients, Domino's Pizza, and they will have television campaigns, right? And those, let's say, are going to be the first week into the NFL season. All that work is committed to way in advance, and that's happening whether or not you're ready. So what needs to, the counter to that then is that now we get to muck around with scope or budget, right? Maybe I need more developers to be done on time, but regardless, we have to be done with, when the TV commercials are ready to go. So Another thing I think about when I'm preparing to build is the tech stack. Because often this can give us troubles, especially as we get started early on in the project. One of the first things I want to know is, where's this thing going to be hosted? Where is my website going to be hosted? If we're lucky, it's hosted at a place like Acquia or Pantheon. We know the tech stack. We know they know what they're doing. They've optimized the tech stack for Drupal. That's great. But what happens if it's not that, right? Is an internal IT department going to be giving us our tech stack? Do they understand Varnish and how to optimize it? Do they understand how to build my SQL server, or an Apache server, or Nginx server? Do they know how to route traffic to the place? Those types of things. And we want to be on the ready for it. The local development environment is another thing that I think a lot about. At Bounteous, all of our projects have local development environments. We largely depend on Drupal VM and using Vagrant. But what happens when your client says, I want to be involved, and by the way, we run Windows machines, right? Not that you can't do it, but you will run into unexpected problems if you have not tried this in the past. Another thing that seems to me to be important and often a gotcha in projects that we want to be prepared for is how the data is going to flow through the system. Specifically, I'm thinking about when we're trying to integrate with various other platforms. It's really easy to integrate with Google Tag Manager, right? We install a module and we do our configurations. But what happens if it's an internal system, or it's a third-party system that's fairly old and doesn't have robust APIs? We still probably need to do that integration, but we just want to know how we're going to do that. Migrating content is a similar problem. As you're replatforming a site, I have to think about where I'm getting this content and how I'm going to migrate it. And am I going to migrate all of the content? Do I really want to migrate the homepage, or do I only want to migrate the 40,000 blog posts? Right? Where is the spend going to be best there, and how am I best going to do this? So we thought a lot about what's going on with the migrations and all that good stuff, and we know the tech stack, and we've helped the design team come up with a plan. Now I want to document the plan. So I always write some sort of architecture plan in a document. This plan, provides a fair amount of detail, but I also want to keep it high enough level so that the project manager can read it and understand what's happening. The business analyst can do this. A client, whether they're internal or external, anybody that comes onto the project should be able to read this and understand it. Basically, this is the vision I have for how we're going to execute the project. Some of the things I like to define there are things like the development workflow. So how does something go from a requirement to into production? There's lots of moving parts that are there. There are several people or roles that have responsibilities to do this, but I want to know how I'm going to do this and make sure that it's well documented so everybody's aware of how we'll do this. I'll also talk about the theme that we're going to use. So the sites that we build all have custom themes, but we're always basing those off of some kind of base theme. So are we going to use something like Classy out of Drupal core, or are we going to use something like Zerb Foundations because we want to take advantage of the foundations? I also think about the modules that the build's going to depend on. So I don't list every single module because no one really cares if we're using Shield to keep prying eyes away early on. But I do care about things like panels and panelizer or layout builder. Like those give us clues and give whoever is reading this document clues as to how I'm building the site or how I envision the site should be built. We also want to describe any key points of the architecture that are there. I touched on migrations and integrations, as you might have have picked up on. They've caused problems in a few of my projects, and so I'm always on the lookout for those things. But what about other parts of the architecture? One of the projects we've done in the last few years depends heavily on varnish and edge side includes. And it's not something that people do on a day-to-day basis, right? So I want to make sure that whoever's coming into this project can understand that part of the architecture, without a lot of digging. That it's pretty clear to them what we're doing, and then, as you come into the project, and you run into issues, this gives you a clue as to what's happening at that point. So we have our plan, we're ready to execute. And I think, developers love writing code. We love coming up with solutions, but it's really important to me to emphasize the fact that it's not really about writing a lot of code. It's about solving a lot of problems. And so, that's, especially in a community like Drupal, we have lots of things that we can take advantage of to help us solve problems without writing a whole lot of code. When the build is getting ready to be started, I want the developers to have a framework to make decisions. So as an architect, I don't want to make every little choice and every decision, but I do want the folks on my team to understand, how I would go about making the decision. And I do that with some guiding principles. These are four that, I think are pretty common in my projects. Yours might vary, but I think they're pretty good. The first one is basically use core and contribute if you can. The less, fewer modules that I write, the fewer code I write, the less I'm responsible for, keeping it secure and keeping it bug free. Touch each area of the application as few times as possible. So if I'm building, a blog section for the site, try to group that work all together. Every time I have to touch the blog section of the site, I have QA, I have peer reviews. If we're having multiple releases to production, there's UAT testing that has to happen. But we want to just be concise. It'll help us be more efficient. I know nobody hacks core or contrib or applies patches, but assuming you do, just do it right. So when I first started Drupaling, everyone's like, don't ever do this. But I think we've advanced to the point where we realize it has to happen on occasion, and the right way to do it is using patch files, right? And if you use Composer, you can have it automatically apply patches for you. So it's great. And the last one is, one of my favorites, but not often thought about, which is don't write any "we will need this later" code. Developers have this insane habit of being in code and saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if it just did this? And they add that code, and that code just lingers, forever. We tend not to use it again. It tends to be the place where we find bugs. It's, just don't do it. Contrib modules, are a great way, to stand on the shoulders of giants and really get a lot of, efficiencies. I think of it, especially when we're using the same ones over and over again. There've been lots of nice talks that I've been at, and I was at one yesterday. I talked about site building and talked about bricks and stuff. And the point there was like, hey, like this module doesn't play nice with this module, and this module, and multilingual is a problem, right? So you want to use the same modules over and over again because you want to know where the gremlins are. We want to know what's going to be gotchas. This is a list of the modules I tend to use on most of my projects. Your list might be different, but the point is to have that list of modules that you're going to go back to over and over again. So what happens if your toolbox is one tool short, right? We might need another module. So I think it's pretty easy, right? We're going to search in Drupal.org and project modules, or we'll go to Google. Or you might know a friend that knows what they're doing. They can help you out. But ultimately, we want to try to find a module that fits our requirements. And once you find the module, you say, yep, that meets my requirements. I think the important thing to understand is your work's not done yet. You still have to figure out if you want to use that module. And when I'm thinking about whether or not to use a module, I have a few questions that I always ask myself. Is it covered by the security team? If it is, that's a bonus, right? We tend to think that they cover, the best modules that are out there, the most used modules. Who are the maintainers and what was the last commit? You know, if it's a well-known person in the community and the last commit was 2 days ago, that's really good. But what happens if there's like 7 commits, the last one was 2 years ago, and you don't know who the maintainer is? You know, not saying you wouldn't use the module, right? But it should weigh against using the module if you're following my philosophy. You know, are there a lot of sites using it? Is the issue queue active? You know, this isn't a decision tree, but when you answer these questions as a totality, you can weigh that against, you know, what it is you're trying to build and figure out if it makes sense to use it. Another place that developers and folks working on the project can gain some efficiencies is with using these other tools. You know, Composer is a great dependency management tool. I won't dive into it. There was a talk, I think, yesterday, Composer 101, that if you're not really familiar with Composer, I would highly suggest checking out. But you know, we use it to manage our dependencies. Drush is like my favorite tool. I use it all the time. I'm a command line guy, and Drush is my way to do, I won't say everything, but lots of things. You know, that's how I cache rebuild. I don't remember passwords to sites. I use ULI to get password, you know, to get a one-time link. You know, I don't remember which Acquia site and how to SSH into it. I just use Drush SSH. It has lots of great tools for you to use that will make you more efficient. Git is the same way for me. I use Git a lot as well. I think you know, 2 perfect examples for me are when I'm getting ready to commit code. One of the things I'll talk about in a little bit is peer reviews and how you should be the first one that reviews your own code. And I use Git to do this. I do Git status, figure out what's all changed, and I go through them one by one line by one line, doing Git diffs, and I add them one file at a time. I don't add, you know, just everything that done. I also use Git commit or Git to find out which commit broke my website. So there's this great command called git bisect that if you've never used it before, you might want to look it up, but when you're trying to figure out what the heck happened to your website, it's a great way to figure it out. Last on the list for me is Drupal console. Admittedly, I don't use Drupal console as much as others probably do. I find that there's a lot of overlap between Drush and Drupal console. But it does have some really interesting things, like being able to create dummy nodes, dummy taxonomies, dummy users, things of that nature. You know, if you have a chance and you're an expert on the top 3, probably worth checking out. Another place I think where we get stuck in the mud is like solving problems. We find there's a bug in production, or we find there's a bug, you know, during QA. And sometimes folks just struggle with how to solve those problems. You could probably have, you know, an hour-long session on debugging itself, but I have a couple things that I think are really helpful for me when I'm trying to help folks debug. One is just knowing what you have available to you. You know, Drupal provides a lot of great things to do debugging. Logger is one. Develop Web Profile will give you some good information. Drupal console has a bunch of debug commands that you can run. Tweak debugger, make sure that's turned on so you can see how, you know, at least locally, so you can see how you're rendering the content. And then like Drush SCR I use when I have a problem in production, and I don't really have access, nor do I want to have access to like change code and add debug code and things, and I don't want to go through the process of, you know, committing code and pushing it through all my environments. Sometimes I can mimic it with just writing a quick Drush script. Because it'll bootstrap Drupal for me and I have all the things I need there. PHP, you know, don't be embarrassed to use print.r or var-dump. They're great quick ways to do it. But you know, Xdebug is awesome, especially when you integrate it with your IDE. If you work at Bounteous and you say, Chris, I need some help, one of the first questions I'm going to ask you is, you know, let's open it up in the debugger. And if the answer is I can't do it, then you go away until you can, because I think it's a great way to debug. When you're trying to solve a problem, you know, I think it's really important to have a strategy. And the way to develop a strategy is to assess the problem. So, is it only reproducible in production? Can I reproduce it anywhere? Does it only happen when you're an anonymous user? Does it happen only on blog pages? Like whatever information you can gather, I want to use because I want to form a hypothesis about what's happened or what is happening. Now, the key about forming the hypothesis is that you'll test against it, and you're not married to it. Like you're not trying to prove that it's right, and oftentimes I may try to be proving it's wrong. But it's important to have something that's guiding your efforts. And then the last thing is, eliminating possibilities. So what I mean by that is everything you do should give you more information that limits the scope of where the problem is. A good example of this is last week I was helping one of the developers with a local environment problem. We're running Docker with Magento and Drupal, and we were trying to call APIs from Magento, from the Drupal container, and it wasn't working. We were getting a weird error. So we immediately said, we think the problem is Magento. And so we went about trying to prove that was the case, that it was on the Magento side. Turns out, we proved that it wasn't. And so we shifted course, and then we quickly figured out that it was how we were calling the other container from the Drupal container. But without following these steps, we really would have been just spinning our wheels. Efficient projects. So the key, we definitely need technical skills to do this. And I've listed at least 5 things I think are really important for project teams to have. 5 traits. Strong leadership, clearly defined roles, psychological safety is super important, processes are important, but I'm going to focus today on communication. So communication, we do it daily. And the ways I think about it within the project team are in 3 ways. One are the daily stand-ups. We're Scrum, we're Agile, we follow Scrum, so we use stand-up. But whatever your daily status report is. I also think about ad hoc communications. So as we were talking before, it's important for me to understand how everyone uses the telephone, email, and Slack. And if I need somebody, what's the right route to go about getting them? But peer reviews is what I really want to talk about here. So, one of the things I think is really important about peer reviews is, the way I look at them. A lot of people look at them as a way to find bugs, right? And there's no doubt you might find bugs. But I think the real key to peer reviews is, communication and dissemination of information. So at Bounteous, a junior developer can be PRing my code, I'd be PRing other people's code. But it's really important that in the peer review process, people are learning more about other parts of the system. And what we're trying to eliminate there is the bus factor of one problem. We don't want one person to be solely responsible for one area of the application. And when I think about peer reviews, I also think about them, as how they go, right? So to me, they're a conversation. I ask a lot of questions in peer review. Hey, I noticed you did X, but I would have, I think Y might be better. Why did you do X, right? And it could be, hey, I thought about Y, it doesn't work because of yada, 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 that's why I'm doing X. And so again, if we think about it as a way to disseminate information and, it's a conversation, it's I can be learning, and I also might point that out, and he might go, oh, I didn't realize we had a function that did that. Yes, let me fix my code. So I think it's really important to do that. And as I mentioned before, the first person that peer reviews your code is you. So you really need to make sure you review your code as though you're reviewing somebody else's code. So you don't, throw a bunch of junk at somebody and waste their time. Really good quote. I'm going to skip past it. So, another way to think about this is, in 6 months, you're probably going to have to be maintaining this code, right? And so when I think about writing the code for the future, I have these things in mind. Again, this is another topic that you could spend an hour on, but four key things. Everybody knows the dry principle, but it's super important. And I'm often shocked that developers keep doing this, literally finding copy and pasted that I will send back to you in a peer review. Things should do one thing. So variables should hold one bit of information. Functions should do one thing. Classes should define one thing. Everything should do one thing, right? If they do, that helps me write structured code that is self-documented. I want to be able to write a function that's like, let's say, check account balance. And I want you, as the person reading my code, to know that that's all it does. It doesn't also send an email that says, hey, you have a low balance, right? We really want to make sure folks can look at the code, because if I can't trust that the description of the function's right, now I have to look at that function to figure out what's happening there. And then, assuming you've done this, commenting where appropriate becomes really easy. Especially when I was first getting started, I thought it was the right thing to do to say, checking the account balance here, followed by a function that said, check the account balance, right? As I've grown, I've learned that that's not really the way to do it. But I still find that people use too many comments in the code because they're doing things, of this, kind of like that. I love comments at the beginning of functions. They tell me what it's going to do. I love comment, they tell me the inputs and outputs. If you have complex business logic, that's super important as well. But what I find with comments, and the reason I lean towards lean comments, is people often forget to update them. And now if the worst thing, the thing that's worse than having no comments is having comments that are wrong, right? Documentation, please. So we have to understand as developers that not everybody's going to read the documented code. The person that just raised his hand to tell me I had 3 minutes is a great documenter. Andy is awesome, right? Because he understands it's important to share information with the PMs and the DAs of the world, and share that information. Step-by-step instructions are important to have in documentation, and it's a great way to get somebody introduced to a different part of the system. Have them learn it, document it, you peer review the documentation, it's all good stuff. Last couple slides. The best way I have found in my years of doing this to grow yourself is really just to be curious. So, attend conferences, congratulations, you're all curious. Watch webinars, I watch a bunch of them every week. Reading is still really important. There's great Drupal newsletters, but I also subscribe to newsletters from O'Reilly, from ThoughtWorks. There are lots of great people doing great work that aren't, isn't just Drupal. I get an email from Dries every time he has a new blog post, and I read lots of books. I think that's still really important. Ask yourself what your friends are doing, and ask them, right? I'll pick on Brian, he's in the back of the room, but he's been doing a lot of static site generation stuff, and I've learned a ton from him about that. Scott Weston gave a talk yesterday about configuration management, and I spent 15, 20 minutes with him just getting a brain dump. So it's really important to know what your friends are doing in the community. And then lastly, stretch yourself on projects. So you don't want me writing a whole bunch of CSS, it's not what I do. But if I'm in some code and there's just a little tweak that needs to happen, I can take a look at that. Again, don't go too far off in the weeds, but if you get to a point and you feel just a little bit uncomfortable, that's not so bad. Where do you go from here? If you take one thing from this conversation, make sure your IDE has interactive debugging. It's a great way to learn Drupal, especially with hooks and services and all that good stuff. It's really tough to just kind of follow, but an interactive debugging session will help you out. Build a sandbox on your computer so you can experiment with. If I'm looking at a new module, I often will bring it into the site that I'm dealing with because I want to see what's happening. So I'll bring it into a sandbox. And Lando is pretty good for that, I hear. And that's it. Thank you, and any questions? Yes, sir.
So when you talk about peer reviews, we peer review each other's code quite often where we work, but it's not always well received. Even if you try and be nice and say like, hey, I noticed you did X, have you thought about Y?
Yeah.
job is it to make that person less sensitive?
So the question is, if you have someone that you work with that is a little bit too sensitive with the peer reviews, whose job is it to fix the problem? I look to your, whoever your leader is, and at Bounteous it would be me. And I think it's sometimes it's approach, so if you were to talk to me about that, I'd probably talk to you a little bit about how you're doing it, just to make sure that I was comfortable with it. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think we all need to be able to be criticized. One of the slides that got cut, because I was sure I was going to go over with time, was like an affirmation session where you just say, I made a mistake. I find that lots of people can't say that. And it kind of goes back to the psychological safety thing as well. Like, the people that work for me know that they can make a mistake, and it's totally cool, and we're going to figure it out. And then we see if we can solve the problem so it doesn't happen again. But the worst thing for me is like if someone makes a mistake and they bury it, because it just multiplies the problem. So, that thing is the case where what you're talking about, but what I try to do as a leader is try to create that psychological safety, and hopefully we have it on all our project teams and make that a little bit easier.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. So I am the only developer at my job.
Okay.
How would I go about peer reviews? Also, what is your favorite IDE?
So, 2 questions. One was, I am the only developer. How do I do peer reviews? And the other question is, what's my favorite IDE? I'll start with the last one, and I use PHP Storm. And for a long time I required it. I think I've gotten away from that. But still most of the people use it, PHP Storm. So I'm pretty happy with it. That's a good question about how do you do peer reviews with one person. Is there anybody that you can talk through, like talk to them about what you're doing?
The person who was in my job last is still around the university. I can email him.
Okay.
But I think that's about it. Everybody else is kind of specialized.
Brian.
Isn't going to cover everything you're looking for out of peer review, but like what you mentioned about you being your first reviewer, it made me feel silly, but like actually going through the process of submitting a pull request and reviewing it yourself in like GitHub or something before approving it is going to give you some of that.
Yeah. That, and the reason I asked if you have anyone else that you can talk to, also cut from my slides was a picture of my cat. Because Toby, yes, Toby got cut. Because when I'm debugging a problem, often I will talk to my cat. Not because I'm crazy, but just because saying it out loud is different than saying it in your head.
Yeah, rubber duck program.
Yep, exactly.
So it's probably just as good as talking to a coder.
I'd say another thing too is like you're like the only developer in that part of the university. Probably if it's a somewhat big university, maybe there's other developers, and maybe you don't get together and talk about stuff all the time, but maybe also find some time to actually like get together and talk about what you're working on together or something like that. Maybe too. I know like at the University of Minnesota, it's a very big university, but they actually have their own user group meeting every month, and have stuff like that. So there's a possibility there.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen.
I was actually in a similar situation before my present job. I was literally the only developer in the university. We had an IT department of 3.
Oh boy.
And I reported to marketing. And so I was sort of like this lone person out there. I'd be willing to interface with you if you want. So.
Awesome.
What a great camp moment right there.
Okay. All right, one more, and then I'm gonna wrap it up. Sorry.
Let's say you get a big project. How do you pick the team to structure for that? Or if you're like a mid-sized company, and how do you pick what people that you need to complete your own projects?
Let's talk staffing.
Yes. So the question is, if you have a mid to large size project, how do you determine the team? One, I'll always have a solution architect on the project. I tend not to do the architecting anymore because other people are better than me. But I'll have someone like that on the project. And then I try to understand, the best I can what the work is. So we have at Bounteous, we have lots of really smart back-end developers and front-end developers, and then we also have people that are really good, like they're full stack. They're just really good at the whole stack. So depending on the workload, that will dictate it to me. If I find there's more front-end than back-end, I'll try to staff it with more front-end folks. If there's, if there's back in the front end, I'll do that same thing. If I'm not really sure, I try to staff it with full stack folks. And then you can also juggle it too. Because Drupal projects, a lot of times you're doing back-end work to start. We're trying to give the scaffolding to folks so that they can, do all the theming. So you might staff it like that as well, like more back-end folks, in the front, and then more front-end folks in the back.
And then just like they use a little bit of the UI designer, project manager, QA is all peer reviewed.
Yeah, we have all those folks on, on the project. So we do have a designer to make sure we're executing their vision for what the project is on all of our projects. And we have PMs that help us out as well. And then the QAs, are staffed too, along with that. Peer reviews are done strictly on the dev side. So those folks don't really get involved, but.
We do visual QA sometimes.
Oh, sure, yeah, that's a good point, yes. Visual QA. I wouldn't trust us developers to do that either. So, but yeah. So as the consultant in the room, the answers depends, but it's, those are the types of factors I think about.
We also put femurs on to establish patterns and then roll off to get full stack people on the right way.
Okay. Last slide. Contribution day is tomorrow from 10 to 4. You don't need to know code to get back, so please help out. And thank you.